My name is Tammy Besherse, and I'm an attorney with South Carolina Appleseed. And today we're going to talk about the legal rights of persons who may not have proper documents. This presentation is a combination of Know Your Rights from various attorneys, including our office. It is important to know that this is not a substitute for legal advice, that every situation is very specific, and therefore you should consult an immigration attorney about your facts. And do not go to notarios. We know that in Spanish-speaking countries, notarios are lawyers. They are absolutely not lawyers in this country, do not know the law, and cannot give legal advice. And many of them will take your money. So first, let's start out with who can be deported. The facts are that anyone who's not a U.S. citizen can be deported. Now, there are people who are more likely to be deported than others, though. For example, it is a civil violation to be in this country without legal status, and that does mean you can go to jail and sit and wait for a hearing. Because of the limited number of ICE agents, it's more likely, though, that someone without legal status who has a previous order of deportation or who's had other contact with ICE or local law enforcement would be picked up first. Sometimes ICE goes to workplaces when they know that perhaps the I-9s, which are documents that you fill out when you're hired, are fraudulent, and that can occur there. It happened years ago, not recently. Any person without legal status who commits certain crimes would be a priority for deportation. So those are what people need to know. So knowing this, it becomes important for people to think and plan ahead. So people need to think about the plan for themselves and their family. They need to start getting together important legal documents. And if they have legal status, carry the documents that show that. That way they can be shown to local law enforcement or ICE if they ask for it. Under federal law, people with legal status are supposed to carry their documents. It's not always prosecuted, but it is actually the law. Other things to do: have important phone numbers readily available. Your attorney's phone number would be the first one to start with. Your country's consulate in the United States, because as a national, you are entitled to call your consulate. Any kind of important numbers for your spouse, your children's school or daycare, your church or neighbors, whoever you might be depending on if for some reason you can't go pick your kids up. Documents are also very important. Birth certificates for you and your children, passports for you and your children, photo identification cards and work permits, bank records, mortgage and lease records, any papers from immigration. It's also important that if your children are eligible for dual citizenship, to do that now. Because if for some reason your child is US born, but you want to take them back to Honduras with you, it's important to go ahead and get that dual citizenship so they have more rights when they return to Honduras, if that's where you take them. So that also means getting their passport from that country. And you can do that in your consulate here in the United States. People also need to consider doing a power of attorney. And this is a document that lays out your wishes for your children and your property. You can do it as a springing power of attorney, which means it does not go into effect until someone is arrested or deported. It is better to have a lawyer do this who will know the laws and could recognize if there were problems with a title to a car or a house, and perhaps ways to fix that before your wishes would not be carried through. Do keep in mind the only legal way to give custody to someone is in court, but this would help greatly with your wishes and give someone who may be caring for your child various rights that would be important immediately. So questions to consider for a power of attorney include: what will you do with your family if you're deported? Where do you want your children to live? Do you have someone here who can care for them? And if you do, it's very important that that person have some type of legal status and be a very reliable legal status, or they be a U.S. citizen. What do you want to happen to your property? Do you want to sell it? Do you want someone to rent it? If you have an immigration case, also take that into consideration. It's very important that whoever you have dealing with your power of attorney be someone you trust. It's also important to know that ICE does not have the right to take your children away from you. Therefore, it's important that you decide in advance, do your children stay in the U.S. or go with you? Do you have a child custody situation in court where this may complicate factors and you really do need a lawyer to draw up the power of attorney? Again, what do you want to do with your assets? Who do you want to have access to your bank account? Do you have a bank account where perhaps the bank is located in countries throughout the different regions, and you may be able to actually access the bank account if you're deported? Again, you must think through these things, and you must think through who you would designate to act as your agent in your power of attorney, someone who's trusted, because once they get all this power, you may have a hard time fixing problems down the road if you're in another country. So it has to be someone you really, truly trust. If you have an immigration case pending, get all your documents related to that case ready. Contact your attorney if you're missing documents. Also, keep copies of these important documents with someone you trust, and ask them to get in contact with your attorney if you end up in detention. You may also want to carry something with you that shows you have a pending case before immigration or pending legal status. And many times this is through documents that immigration has sent you, or you may want to ask your attorney to write you a letter to this point. Now that we've talked about that, let's turn a little bit to what might happen if you have contact with ICE or the local police. With both agencies, you have the right to remain silent. Under the law, you actually must say you want to remain silent. You have the right to speak with a lawyer. The lawyer is not always going to be free. If you are arrested for an immigration violation, you do not have the right to free counsel. If you are arrested for certain things in South Carolina, it depends on the charge, but you may have a right to a free lawyer. You can exercise your rights at any time. No law enforcement agent, no matter which agency they're with, can physically hurt or threaten you. You have the right not to sign any documents. However, sometimes the document you're asked to sign might be for a free lawyer if you're facing certain offenses in South Carolina. Other times, it may be they're asking you to sign something when you're booked in the jail saying, this is my property that you took off me. So it's very important that if you don't understand what you're signing, to ask the agent, whether it be law enforcement or ICE, to tell you what the form says so that you don't sign away your rights. And the reason this can be dangerous is sometimes you're asked to sign what's called voluntary departure with ICE, where you give up any rights to a hearing or the right to stay in the country. And people don't want to do that automatically. That's something you need to talk to a lawyer about. So again, be very clear on what you're signing. You do have the right to have visits and contacts from your consulate here in the United States. So that's important. People also ask, well, what about my spouse or child? If they're not with me when I'm picked up, what should I do? Well, you don't have to tell ICE about them. It is important if you're dealing with child custody situations, though, that you tell the ICE officer, because there's a directive that tells ICE that they may need to keep your case pending until the custody issues are over, especially if your child is in the care of the Department of Social Services. You do not have to tell ICE anything but your name. You can let them know you want to speak to an attorney before answering questions. Again, when it's with immigration, it will not be a free lawyer, but someone you have to hire. If you do choose to answer questions with ICE, you should always tell the truth and never lie. Another scenario we get asked about is, what happens if ICE comes to my house? Well, ICE can come to your house. Usually they have a warrant. Sometimes it's a search warrant signed by a judge, or sometimes it's an arrest warrant for someone they're looking for in your household. You should ask them to show you the warrant, if possible, slide it under the door, or somewhere you can easily access it. If you let ICE in your house, they will ask everyone in the house questions about themselves. It is important that you stay calm and you do not run, because then law enforcement will chase you. You can ask ICE or the local police for their badge. It's okay to make sure that they are legitimately who they say they are. If you're at home and ICE approaches and it shows they have a warrant for someone specific in your house, send that person out. I know that can be hard to do, but if you let ICE in your house to arrest that person, they will ask everyone questions. And at that point, depending on people's answers, if ICE has probable cause to believe those people lack legal status, they can arrest them. So it's very important that if they do have a warrant for a specific person, they go outside the house and do not let ICE in. If ICE comes to your job, again, be calm, don't run. And again, they can only arrest you if they have probable cause to believe you've done something. You can tell them your name. That's all you have to tell them. You may wish for your boss to have your family's contact information in case you are arrested, and perhaps someone can place a call to your family, letting them know what happened. Another scenario we get asked about is sometimes people don't have legitimate documents. If this is your situation, do not ever show anyone a fake or false document. That is very important. Possession of fake or fraudulent documents could be a felony. It could be identity theft depending on the situation, and that will make you a priority for deportation. You do have the right not to tell ICE your country of origin. If you do have legal papers, again, you must show these. That is required by federal law. If you are detained by ICE or the local police, you have the right to one phone call. And we get asked a lot, well, can it be from my cell phone? No, it is from the detention center phone. Both ICE and the police, when they arrest you, take your personal property and inventory it. So it's important to memorize important phone numbers in case you don't have your cell phone handy. People can visit you while you're in detention. It is highly recommended, though, that any visitor have legal status in the United States and not be in jeopardy of deportation for any kind of offense they may have committed. ICE and local police have the right to request photo ID of anyone who comes to a detention facility. This is for safety and security reasons. As an attorney, I've been asked for my ID. It is not uncommon. People must also go through a metal detector. So if someone wants to visit another person and they are undocumented, they should not go because they do not have proper ID. If they present fraudulent ID, they could be charged with a crime. It's very important that only people with legal status who do not have perhaps a final order of deportation or other things in their past that would pop up when they go to the detention facility, they should not go. If you are arrested for something by the local police, they may contact ICE. And this is because when you're booked, secure communities comes into play for any non-US citizen. ICE is then made aware of your presence and may place a detainer on you. A detainer is simply something that ICE gives the local police that says, don't release this person, we want them. Sometimes ICE will do that before your sentence starts, before you even have a hearing, or after you've completed a hearing or a sentence. It really does depend on what you might be charged with and what your previous immigration violations are. If this does happen and ICE comes and gets you, more than likely you will end up in a detention facility outside of South Carolina. The only detention facility in South Carolina for ICE holds has 14 beds. Because of that, typically people are sent outside of South Carolina, and it can be anywhere in the country. Many times it's in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta. But if that facility is at capacity, You could even be sent as far away as Phoenix. So that's important to know for you and your family. If ICE puts you in jail, you may have a possibility of getting bond. It really depends on any kind of criminal record you have, if ICE or a judge might deem you a national security threat, and that's a very broad term, or what your previous immigration history is. Sometimes people do make bond. In the current day and age, if you made bond, you'd probably also be placed on electronic monitoring to ensure you show back up for court, which you would have to pay for. If you are deported or you take voluntary departure, generally, and there are varying rules, but generally you would be limited in your rights to come back to the country. You would want to speak to a lawyer about your specific facts, but sometimes people fall under 10-year bars, and sometimes they can ask for special waivers. But again, this would be very specific to your case. This is general advice. You would want to talk to an attorney about those rights. What can happen, though, is if you return without permission and you've been banned from the United States, you can go to federal prison if you're caught. If you sign any documents, whether it be deportation, voluntary departure, keep copies of all those and give them to your attorney. Again, though, it's highly recommended you don't sign anything unless you talk to a lawyer and know exactly what it is you have signed. Finally, the last thing you should know for today is that you should never present false documents, you should never lie, and you should never, ever claim to be a U.S. citizen if you are not. And always be calm if confronted by ICE or local law enforcement. You should never run. For more information on this topic and others related to your rights, you may wish to visit scjustice.org.